here today talking about your inner critic versus your inner sage. So, if you are like me, I tend to be very hard on myself. I know that maybe that's not everybody, but maybe it's part of my personality and partly the way I was raised. I don't know. But I am my own worst critic for sure. And I was talking to my friend Tracy and saying, okay, I've got some challenges in my life that I'm aware of. At least I've got the first step of being aware of this mental block that I have. But now, how do I overcome it? And so she agreed to be my guest to come today to share with us her wisdom. And if you're not familiar, this is Work Together Wednesday, where we get together to talk about what we've learned and support each other in this small business entrepreneurial world. Although today's topic really applies to everybody because we all have an inner critic, right? Um, Tracy, are you going to tell me we all also have an inner sage?
I am. And, it really is, we do biologically all have that inner critic. It is part of our survival brain. It is the part that makes sure that we cross the street. Look both ways before we cross the street to make sure that we're safe and that our needs are getting met. Right? So you're right. We all have that inner critic.
So, what do we do with that inner critic?
Right? And that's the big question. What do we do? So, okay, we acknowledge we have the inner critic, and the tricky part is we all tend to hear that voice, right? That's the voice we kind of tune into and train into, and that's the voice that we hear. Um, and so, one of the biggest tips, and anybody who has worked with me knows that I've already done this because I talk about it all the time, is to actually make friends with your inner critic. And yeah, and what I mean by that is, you know, the inner critic is there for a purpose, right? But the challenge is its main goal is to keep the status quo. Because if you keep the status quo and your needs are being met, then you're safe, right? You'll live
Okay.
to see another day. And the challenge becomes when we want to do something new or do a Zoom call or do something like that. So what do I mean by making friends? First of all, it's kind of tapping in and what does that voice sound like? What does that inner critic voice sound like somebody you know? Do they have a really firm voice? Do they have a shy voice? Like, get kind of in touch with what it sounds like. Is it male? Is it female? If it was playing a role in the movie, what role would it be playing? Is it trying to be the superstar? And then here's the challenge for the inner critic is give your inner critic a name. And so mine happens to be Lucy. That's I have lots and lots of conversations with Lucy. um, and why this is important is that because when you feel yourself kind of beating yourself up, right, or that voice is going, you can say, Lucy, hold on. What are you trying to protect me from? Right? Because I think a lot of us try to just push away the inner critic. Like, we're going to persevere, we're going to push through, we're going to ignore that they're saying this. But it's biological. It is part of our brains that have always been there. And so when we push her to the corner, baby's just going to keep coming back, right? So we ask her, what are you trying to protect me from here? Is it real? And then here's the other part is thanking her. Thanking her for making sure that you look both ways before you cross the street. Um,
So that's
and
an
then the second
interesting
person, yeah, go ahead.
concept because I haven't ever thought of that before. I've tried to shut down negative self-talk. My inner critic says should a lot. You should be doing this, you should be doing that. Why are you reading a book when you should be doing laundry? um
Right.
so I just try to shut it down, but what you're saying is it's like having challenges happen in life where you can either complain about them or say this is a lesson to be learned, what lesson can I learn here? And you're saying you need to be aware of your inner critic and ask, what lesson do I need to learn from this?
Yeah, yeah, and like the example you gave is perfect. So like if you're reading the book and the inner critic's up like, "Oh, you should be doing laundry." You can say like in my case I say, "Hello, Lucy. Why are you telling me that it's not safe to read this book and I should be doing laundry?" And that's where you can start, and there's some ways to get in touch with what the true emotional triggers are, but you start to see like, well, what is Lucy really afraid of? Is Lucy concerned that I'm going to lose control and never do laundry again, and I'm going to just, laundry's going to pile up all over the place? No, Lucy, I'll do laundry at 6 p.m. We're good, right? And it's having understanding what is triggering her to come up. And the other piece is to understand and recognize that generally what triggers our inner critic is what used to be one of our strengths.
Okay.
So if one of your strengths is being super organized and making sure that you have a neat environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
The inner critic's going to bubble up when you're reading that book because it gets fearful that that need's not going to be met, that the house isn't going to be organized, and it's having that inner dialogue instead of just listening. It's having that conversation.
Okay. Okay. And then I interrupted you. What were you going to say is next?
Oh, and no, and I was going to say, and then you've got the other side of the coin is also making friends with your inner sage, right? Because a lot of times that inner wisdom, it's a different voice. It sounds a little different, but we kind of blend it all together, and acknowledging when you know if that inner wisdom, is it the inner wisdom or the inner critic coming up and saying, "Hey, Mel, you need to do the laundry, because you haven't done it in a month." And that's, I know that's not true, but right, and it's understanding whether it's working on a big project or anything, but that inner wisdom kind of taps into our knowing of what we think is going to best meet our needs. And then the inner critic, though, will kind of swoop in to make sure that we're not jumping off that cliff without making sure that there's water at the bottom of it.
So, what you're telling me is I just really need to be much more self aware and analyze my self talk.
Yeah, and self compassionate, right? Know that you're not beating yourself up just because you like to be beat up. Right? It's having that self compassion and really making friends with that inner critic, and acknowledging, honoring, and then thanking it. And the more we honor and thank our inner critic, the less uptight that she'll be. I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie Inside Out?
Yes, yes.
Right? And you can kind of envision, like, once you know who your inner critic is it the angry firehead? Is it the nervous purple guy? Who is your inner critic? And then you start having that dialogue with them.
Okay. Question that comes to mind: is there a way to magnify the voice of my inner sage?
So yes, and Jet, that's a great question. And really, our inner wisdom, our inner sage, tends to come forth more once we hone in on that voice. So I kind of, our inner sage and wisdom sometimes has what I lovingly refer to as the mommy voice. Like it keeps trying to talk to us, and then we just are sort of ignoring it because
Yes.
the inner critic is stronger, or the one that we've tuned into before, and that's who we're listening to. So again, by making friends and acknowledging, I am a big believer in naming both the inner critic and the inner sage, so that you can start telling the difference
Okay.
between the two.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your advice today. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up?
Nope, I just hope, I wish that everybody really take that moment and kind of think about your inner critic, and would love to know what you name your inner critic.
All right. If you have a name for your inner critic, put it in the comments for us. And Tracy, tell us about Ready for Reboot and the way that you help people.
Sure. Ready for Reboot. I am a certified life coach. I tend to work with individuals who are women who know that they want to change, but they're not quite sure how. A lot of my work is also around ADHD individuals and neurofeedback, which can help retrain and activate the brain in a more positive way.
Awesome. So, if you have issues in these areas, I highly recommend you reach out to Tracy. The first phone call is always complimentary to figure out if it's a good fit or not. And she's been a fantastic encouragement to me in my East Cobb Women in Business group. So, thank you for being part of our group and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, we will see you guys not next week because it's spring break. I'm taking the week off. The week after, we'll be back for Work Together Wednesday.